The night was drenched in rain, and Emma's heart raced as she turned the corner, her umbrella useless against the storm. The narrator described how her breath fogged in the cold air, her chest tightening with dread. A car screeched to a halt under a flickering streetlight, and the sharp sound sliced through the darkness like a warning. The driver's door swung open, and Daniel stepped out, his face unreadable as shadows dripped from his features. Emma whispered, "Daniel, what's happening?" But her voice drowned under the thunder. The passenger door clicked, and Sarah emerged, her hand reaching for his with ease, her lips curved in a guilty smile. Emma's eyes widened, her body trembling, every sacrifice of years collapsing in a single moment. The narrator said, "Betrayal does not knock softly, it shatters lives in one cruel instant." The narrator described how Emma stood frozen, her heart pounding like a drum she could not silence. Daniel muttered to Sarah, "She wasn't supposed to see us," his voice low, guilty yet unshaken. Emma gasped, unable to form words, her lips trembling against the cold. Her mind replayed years of shared laughter, promises and sacrifices, now reduced to ashes on the wet pavement. The storm raged around them, but inside her, silence screamed louder than thunder. "Why, Daniel?" she whispered, her question lost in the rain. The narrator said betrayal enters like lightning, splitting hearts open before they can prepare. Emma realized, love can disguise itself in lies until the mask breaks apart. The narrator revealed Emma's knees weakened, forcing her hand to the wall of a nearby building for balance. Sarah whispered, "She'll get over it," her tone sharp, dismissive, piercing deeper than any blade. Daniel looked away, unable to meet Emma's gaze, his silence heavier than his betrayal. Emma's chest burned as if every breath was betrayal itself, her lungs drowning in sorrow. She remembered every promise, every night he swore loyalty, each word now venomous lies. "You were my everything," she whispered, though her voice was barely audible. The rain swallowed her tears, hiding them in the storm's fury. The narrator explained Emma's heart cracked in silence, but inside, a storm fiercer than rain gathered. Daniel muttered, "It wasn't supposed to be this way," his voice faint but sharp. Emma said, "You chose her, Daniel," words cutting like glass. The betrayal was undeniable, and each syllable carved itself into the air between them. Sarah smirked faintly, stepping closer to him, her fingers sliding against his sleeve as if claiming victory. Emma's body shook, not from cold but from the cruelty of recognition. She had lost him long before tonight. The night no longer felt wet but burning, the rain only hiding her fire. The narrator described how Emma's scream tore through the storm, raw and desperate, echoing across the empty street. Daniel flinched but did not move toward her, his guilt drowned beneath cowardice. Sarah tugged his arm and whispered, "Shall survive," her voice cruel in its simplicity. Emma's body folded forward, grief hitting like waves that refused to stop. She clutched her chest, her heart beating against betrayal's chains, her breath shallow. Every dream shattered in seconds, every memory poisoned beyond repair. She whispered to herself, "It was all a lie," the words tasting like blood in her mouth. The narrator said sometimes, truth does not heal, it destroys. The narrator revealed that Emma's body moved on instinct, carrying her home though her heart begged to collapse. Inside her small apartment, silence suffocated the walls once filled with laughter. She stared at the family photos lined across the shelf, images of a life built on lies. Her fingers brushed over one frame, her smile frozen beside Daniel's, a cruel reminder of trust misplaced. Emma whispered, "Did none of it matter?" her voice hollow. She sank into the couch, the weight of betrayal pressing down on her chest. Every sacrifice she had made, every dream she had poured into love, now mocked her with merciless clarity. The narrator said, "She was not just a woman betrayed, she was a soul stripped of certainty, forced to question her very worth." The narrator explained Emma poured herself a glass of water, her hand trembling so violently half of it spilled onto the counter. The sound of the liquid dripping echoed in the quiet room, like accusations she could not escape. She stared into the glass, her reflection fractured, as though she were staring at a stranger. Daniel's voice lingered in her memory, the sweet words he once whispered now sour lies. She whispered to herself, "I gave him everything." Her throat tightened as the truth clawed its way through her chest. Emma wondered if love had ever been real, or if she had been blind from the start. The narrator said sometimes heartbreak is not sudden. It is the slow recognition of years wasted. The narrator described Emma wandering into the bedroom, her footsteps dragging as though each step carried the weight of years. The bed stood neatly made, the pillows still smelling of his cologne, a scent now sickening. She pressed her face into the fabric, inhaling betrayal with every breath. "How long did you lie to me, Daniel?" she whispered into the silence. The room felt smaller, pressing inward, suffocating her with memories of nights spent waiting for a man who never truly belonged to her. She sat at the edge of the bed, her hands clutching the sheets as though they could hold back the flood of grief. The narrator said, "Grief is cruel. It does not whisper, it crushes with merciless force." The narrator said, Emma opened the closet, staring at Daniel's clothes still hanging neatly, ties aligned, shoes polished. They mocked her with their presence, each garment a silent witness to his deceit. She pulled one of his shirts to her chest, her tears soaking the fabric he once wore proudly. Her voice cracked. "You promised me forever." The words dissolved into sobs that shook her fragile frame. She sank to the floor, clutching the shirt, as if holding on to what remained of her shattered world. Her reflection in the mirror beside the closet revealed not a lover but a ghost of herself. The narrator explained that betrayal steals not only trust but identity, leaving nothing but fragments of who you once were. The narrator described how Emma sat at the kitchen table, the storm outside echoing the chaos within her. She opened her journal, the pages once filled with love notes, dreams, and hopes. Tonight, her pen scratched across the page with trembling hands. "He lied," she wrote, the ink smearing with falling tears. Everything was a lie. She closed the book, pressing her forehead against its cover, as though words could contain her sorrow. The silence of the room consumed her, broken only by her shallow breathing. The narrator said her world had collapsed. Yet within the wreckage, a question flickered. Was there strength in surviving the lie? The narrator said, Emma woke the next morning, her body heavy with exhaustion, but her mind refusing peace. She unlocked Daniel's laptop, her fingers trembling as though guided by dread more than curiosity. The screen lit with a flood of messages, each line a dagger slicing deeper into her already wounded heart. There were promises of weekends with Sarah, words of passion once whispered to Emma now stolen by another. "How could you give her what belonged to us?" she murmured, the words tasting like ash. Her chest tightened as if the room itself was collapsing inward. The narrator explained, "Truth has no mercy. It arrives uninvited, peeling illusions until only raw wounds remain." The narrator revealed Emma scrolled further, each message more brutal than the last. Sarah wrote, "Shall never know." And Daniel replied, "She trusts me too much." Emma covered her mouth, a muffled sob breaking free, her body shaking uncontrollably. Her memories twisted like knives, their laughter now cruel echoes of deception. She whispered, "I was blind," her words trembling in the quiet room. The betrayal had not been a mistake. It was deliberate, crafted, and sustained. Her hands trembled against the keyboard, the weight of proof suffocating her. The narrator said betrayal does not just break love, it breaks reality, making every memory suspect, every word poisoned. The narrator described Emma printing the messages, her hands unsteady as sheets of paper slid out, each one a record of cruelty. She spread them across the table, the ink smudged by drops of her tears. The words danced in front of her eyes like ghosts of her lost trust. Emma whispered, "You built a life with me but lived in her arms." The truth stung sharper in black and white, undeniable, permanent. Her body leaned forward as she pressed her forehead against the pages, her sobs shaking the table. The narrator said written betrayal is eternal, for ink preserves what hearts may try to deny. The narrator explained Emma called her closest friend, hoping for comfort, but her voice cracked as soon as she spoke. "He's been lying to me," she whispered, her breath broken. The silence on the other end was heavy before the friend whispered back, "I thought you knew." Emma's grip on the phone tightened, her entire body frozen as betrayal widened. Not only had Daniel hidden his affair, but those around her had carried pieces of the truth. "You let me live blind," Emma said, her words sharp and wounded. The narrator said pain multiplies when silence becomes complicity, when those trusted remain quiet as your world burns. The narrator revealed Emma pacing the room, her breath quickening, her hands clutching her head as the storm of truth consumed her. "Everyone knew but me," she muttered, her voice a mixture of rage and despair. She slammed her hand against the table, the sound echoing like a cry for justice. The betrayal no longer belonged only to Daniel. It stretched through her world, infecting even the trust of her friends. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, grief turning into anger, sorrow transforming into fire. The narrator said betrayal is a chain reaction. It spreads, consuming everything it touches, until trust itself feels impossible to believe in again. The narrator described Emma sitting on the floor, exhaustion consuming her when her phone buzzed suddenly. She almost ignored it, but the name flashing on the screen froze her. Her estranged mother. Emma hesitated before answering, her voice brittle. On the other end, her mother's voice trembled. "I never told you the truth, sweetheart." Emma stiffened, dread creeping through her veins. The words poured out like poison. Her father was not the man she believed. The betrayal reached beyond Daniel and Sarah. Her own family had hidden truths for decades. Emma whispered, "Why now?" The narrator said sometimes betrayal is not singular, it is generational, rooted deep in bloodlines where silence breeds destruction. The narrator explained Emma's mother's confession unraveled years of deception. "Your father was a man I left before you were born," she said softly. Emma pressed her hand to her mouth, her mind spinning, the floor tilting beneath her. Betrayal was no longer confined to her marriage. It had seeped into her very identity. She whispered, "All my life has been built on lies." Her body trembled, unable to decide if she should collapse or scream. The narrator said betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from those meant to protect, leaving scars invisible but eternal. Emma realized the love she thought she had, both romantic and parental, had always been fractured illusions. The narrator revealed Emma stormed into her bedroom, pulling open a hidden box of old letters from her mother. She tore them open, reading lines filled with half-truths and omissions, her tears smudging the ink. "You kept me blind," she whispered, voice breaking. Each paper felt heavier than stone, carrying years of silence that had stolen her chance at truth. She slammed the box shut, anger burning through the despair. The narrator said, "Lies do not only wound, they shape lives, building cages disguised as love." Emma's sense of betrayal doubled. Her marriage and her very roots had both been poisoned by deception. The narrator said. Emma clutched one letter tightly, her hands shaking as she screamed into the empty room. "You lied to me," she cried, her voice echoing against the walls. The sound startled even her, raw and violent. She collapsed onto the bed, her body curling inward like a child's, consumed by both abandonment and betrayal. The truth felt unbearable. Not only had Daniel deceived her, but her family had betrayed her foundation. Her sobs turned to silence, the room vibrating with unspoken grief. The narrator explained truth has the power to both free and destroy, leaving Emma unsure which fate awaited her. The narrator revealed Emma staring into the mirror, her reflection blurred by tears, her face pale and hollow. She whispered, "Who am I if everything was a lie?" Her voice trembled as though her very identity was shattering. Her world had split open. A husband's betrayal, a friend's complicity, and now a family secret that stole her history. She gripped the edge of the sink, her knuckles white, her breath shallow. The narrator said betrayal has layers, like peeling skin from bone. Each revelation strips away another part of the soul. Emma realized she was not only mourning love but also the loss of who she thought she was. The narrator said, Emma walked into the cafe where Sarah often met Daniel. her footsteps sharp against the tiled floor. Sarah looked up, startled, her smirk faltering as Emma approached. Emma placed the printed messages on the table, her voice low but steady. "You thought I'd never know." Sarah's eyes flickered with arrogance before she replied, "He chose me because I gave him what you couldn't." The words cut like blades, but Emma's expression hardened. The narrator explained that anger, when sharpened by betrayal, can turn into steel resolve. Emma leaned closer, her whisper dangerous, "You may have him, but you'll never have my soul." The narrator revealed Daniel entered the cafe moments later, his eyes widening as he saw both women. He froze, guilt written in the slump of his shoulders. Emma turned, her gaze piercing him like a blade. "All those years," she said, her voice trembling yet unyielding, "you built our life on lies." Daniel stammered, "I never wanted to hurt you," but his excuses rang hollow in the tense air. Sarah smirked, her hand sliding over his, claiming victory before Emma's eyes. The narrator said confrontation is the crucible where love and betrayal burn together, leaving nothing but truth in the ashes. The narrator described how Emma's voice rose, no longer breaking but commanding. "You betrayed me with her, and you betrayed yourself with lies." Daniel's eyes flickered with shame, but silence bound him. Sarah whispered mockingly, "Stop clinging to what's gone." Emma turned sharply, her voice laced with fire. "What's gone is my trust, not my strength." Her words carried through the cafe, silencing the room around them. The narrator explained, this was the turning point. Betrayal had broken her, but it had also ignited a force within her she had long forgotten. The narrator said Daniel finally spoke, desperation cracking his voice. "Emma, I still love you." The words, once her anchor, now felt poisonous. She laughed bitterly, her tears mixing with anger. "Love does not betray, Daniel. You loved yourself, not me." Sarah's face hardened, her smile fading as Emma's strength eclipsed her victory. Emma straightened, her body trembling but unbroken. The narrator explained betrayal's climax is not the destruction of the victim, but the awakening of their truth. Emma whispered, "You cannot destroy me. You already lost me." The narrator revealed Emma turned and walked out of the cafe, her heart pounding, but her spirit unchained. The rain greeted her as she stepped onto the street, each drop washing away remnants of the lies. Behind her, Daniel and Sarah sat in silence, their victory hollow. Emma whispered to herself, "This pain will not define me." The narrator said the climax was not the end but the rebirth. Betrayal had torn her apart, but from the ruins she found her strength. Her voice, once trembling, now carried certainty she would survive even if scarred. The narrator described Emma sitting alone on her balcony the morning after the confrontation, the storm finally broken, sunlight cutting through clouds. Her face was swollen from tears, yet her posture was upright. She whispered to herself, "I survived the night." The world looked unchanged, but she felt like a different person, stripped raw yet stronger. She thought of Daniel, Sarah, and even her mother, realizing their lies no longer owned her. The narrator explained resolution does not mean joy, but it means reclaiming the right to breathe without chains. Emma closed her eyes and let the light warm her skin, deciding she would no longer live in shadows. The narrator revealed Emma gathering Daniel's belongings into boxes, her movements deliberate and steady. Each shirt folded, each photo frame removed, each trace of him exiled from her space. She whispered, "You don't get to live here anymore." The silence in the room was no longer suffocating but cleansing, like space opening where poison once lived. Her tears fell, but they no longer paralyzed her. The narrator said the act of letting go is not just physical, it is spiritual, a declaration that the betrayer's hold has ended. Emma taped the last box shut, the sound sharp like closure itself. The narrator explained Emma walked to the park later that day, the world alive with children's laughter and the rustle of autumn leaves. Her steps were still heavy, but her chest felt lighter with each breath of crisp air. She sat on a bench, her journal in hand, writing quietly. "I was broken, but I am not destroyed," she wrote, ink steady now. A small smile flickered on her lips for the first time since the betrayal. The narrator said healing begins in small moments, in choosing to live one breath at a time, until hope returns like spring after endless winter. The narrator revealed Emma meeting her closest friend again, not to rage, but to seek closure. She said softly, "You should have told me, but I don't want to carry hate anymore." Her friend's eyes filled with guilt, whispering, "I'm sorry, Emma." The moment did not erase the betrayal, but it planted the seed of forgiveness for herself. The narrator explained resolution is not always reconciliation, but it is the decision to no longer let the past own tomorrow. Emma hugged her friend lightly, her face weary, but her spirit steadier. The narrator described Emma walking to a hilltop at sunset, the sky painted with fire and gold. She stood alone, wind brushing through her hair, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She whispered, "I will heal, even if slowly." The weight of betrayal still lingered, but beneath it was a flicker of freedom. She let out a long breath, watching it vanish into the cool evening air, carrying pieces of pain away. The narrator said resolution is not erasing scars but learning to wear them as proof of survival. Emma turned from the horizon with her first steps into tomorrow. The narrator described Emma sitting on her bed late at night, the journal open before her, candlelight flickering across the pages. Her pen hovered as she tried to put words to the silence in her heart. She whispered, "I am alone, but I am still here." The room echoed with quiet, her strength carved from pain. The betrayal still weighed heavy, but she no longer denied its reality. She pressed her hand against the page, as if sealing her own vow. The narrator said the final act of survival is not forgetting but facing the truth without fear. Emma wrote the last line, "I will not break again." The narrator revealed Emma walking through the city streets at night, neon lights glowing on wet pavement. Each step echoed in the emptiness, her figure small but steady against the vastness of the world. She whispered, "I will carry my scars, but they will not carry me." Her breath rose like smoke in the cold, a fragile reminder she was still alive. She thought of Daniel and Sarah, shadows now fading into distance. The narrator said walking forward does not erase the past, but it proves the future is still hers to claim. The narrator explained Emma stopping at a payphone, her hands trembling as she picked it up. She dialed a familiar number, her voice shaking as she whispered, "I need you." The line rang endlessly before falling silent, no answer on the other side. Her shoulders slumped, the emptiness pressing in harder than the night air. She let the receiver fall back into place, her hand lingering for a moment longer. The narrator said betrayal teaches that sometimes the person you hope for will never answer, leaving you to face the silence alone. The narrator described Emma returning home, the apartment quieter than ever. She walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the remnants of a life once shared. Her voice trembled, "This place holds too many ghosts." She opened the window wide, letting in the night air, letting the wind scatter the heaviness inside. The narrator said sometimes closure is not found in answers, but in the decision to leave the ruins behind. Emma stood by the window, eyes fixed on the horizon, ready to face the unknown. The narrator revealed Emma walking out of her apartment at dawn, suitcase in hand. She paused at the doorway, looking back only once, her eyes glistening but firm. She whispered, "It was all a lie, but I will build my truth." The morning sun rose, painting the sky with gold and crimson, as though the world itself offered a quiet blessing. Her figure moved steadily down the street, leaving betrayal behind with every step. The narrator said the final moment of betrayal is not the end. It is the birth of survival, the haunting silence replaced by the promise of a new beginning.